This is RadioActive, a weekly grassroots environmental and social justice news journal for February 12th, 2015. I'm Meredith DeFrancesco. Today we're talking about the fast-moving and legally controversial reintroduction of changes to the state's mining regulations, the power of industry in concert with elected officials, and what our democracy looks like at work in Augusta. We speak with Representative Ralph Chapman. We also look forward to the changing Maine gathering in Augusta this weekend. In the spring of 2012, Democratic Representative John Martin brought a bill, LD 1853, to the legislature designed specifically to allow open-pit mining at Bald Mountain in Aroostook County at the behest of Canadian company JD Irving. The speed at which the issue arose sent scientists, environmental advocates, and the Maliseet tribe, among others, scrambling to get a hold of what was at stake. Globally, mining has brought severe environmental damage to regional water quality. The bill passed, however, directing the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, to establish new, laxer rules for mining in Maine. Those rules were not, however, approved by the legislature based on environmental and cleanup concerns. And though the legislature did pass a directive for new rules to be drafted, Governor LePage vetoed that bill. It has just come to light this session that those originally rejected DEP rules are going to be put before the legislature again, beginning with a public hearing before the Joint Committee on Environment and Natural Resources on February 25th. In this new and fast-moving chapter of the push to change Maine's mining rules, the Maine Administrative Procedures Act, MAPA, is being initially violated. While the Maine Attorney General's office declined to speak with us, they are involved in the issue, though apparently the legislature is being allowed to sidestep these regulations. This sidestep negates the requirement that the DEP hold a public hearing on the mining rule changes. We have with us today Representative Ralph Chapman to take a look at this issue and what democracy looks like at the Capitol. He is representative from District 133, Blue Hill, Brooklyn, Sedgwick, Brooksville, Castine, and Surrey. He is the only published scientist serving at the Maine legislature. So
what happened a few years ago when John Martin brought the LD 1853, that set into motion a process. An LD 1853 was passed by the legislature over my objection, but nevertheless it passed the legislature and was signed into law by the governor. That set a process into motion in which the Department of Environmental Protection was charged with developing a set of new rules. At the same time, it also scheduled the removal of all of the environmental regulations concerning mining, remove those from statutes with the expectation that the rules would then cover it. The result was that the rules that the Department of Environmental Protection came back with were industry-written rules that were not acceptable, and the legislature did not accept them. And that's why we're still under the 1991 rules. But all of those statutory provisions for environmental regulations on mining disappeared last summer because of what had been set up a couple of years earlier. And consequently, we're in this spot right at this moment in which the 1991 rules are in effect, but they reference statutes that don't exist. So we're in a kind of a state of limbo. What has happened this session, Representative John Martin was reelected, came back into the legislature, announced publicly that one of his two top priorities was getting this mining matter going again. So the Department of Environmental Protection resubmitted the rules that the legislature rejected last year. And they were resubmitted in violation of the Maine's Administrative Procedure Act, which has created a little complication, especially in this past week, and will continue to be an issue for a while. And they are hurrying these rules through the committee, trying to get a committee vote on it so they can get it to the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate and get it approved in order to put it into effect before the bill that I have, which would change the situation quite considerably, even gets a hearing. And that is to say, part of the strategy for pushing this matter forward is to get this stuff through the legislature in a very quick fashion so that any more due deliberation can be avoided. And the part of the Administrative Procedures Act that was violated was the legal requirement to allow the public to come before the Department of Environmental Protection to have a hearing on the rules before they submit them to the legislature. That was the violation. So what we're seeing is a concerted effort led by the Democrats and by the Republicans as well to keep the public out of the process in which some industry-written rules, which are very poor, are being pushed upon us in order to allow mining in Maine in a way in which it poses a very serious threat to our environment.
And you see, again, this push for the speed to, again, put it through the legislature and get it before Governor LePage for signing, in part due to a race to one, outrun your bill, and two, before it becomes on the radar of the public. I mean, it certainly came up very quickly.
Outrunning me is not as important to them as outrunning the public, because it will be very difficult for me to get my bill passed with the Democratic leadership working against me, as well as most of the Republicans working against me. I don't have enough votes to get my bill passed. So my bill is not the threat to their effort, but the public's awareness of what they're doing is a threat. And that's why I appreciate your willingness to have some of this get into the public consciousness a little better, because it's really our only hope is for the public to express their outrage at being left out of the process of the formation of public policy on something that's so important to our economy, to our health, to our future. We're talking about an environmental threat that literally is a million-year-long threat. We're talking about a very long-term threat to major portions of Maine's watershed if things were to go badly. The risk of Bald Mountain being mined is a real serious concern. The mining industry knows enough not to mine Bald Mountain. But JD Irving Company, which is not a mining company and owns it and says they want to mine it, one only hopes that they will learn something from the mining industry and not pursue it. And
can you clarify that, why the mining industry even says that it's not appropriate?
The geochemistry of volcanogenic massive sulfides, which are the type of deposits we have here in Maine that came out of underwater volcanoes 300 to 500 million years ago, is that they have been protected from water and air for hundreds of millions of years. And when you open them up, which you have to do when you mine them, you expose them to water and air. That can create a chemical reaction that turns it into acid and pulls the metals out of the waste rock and so forth, and creates the very toxic downstream conditions. Now, the problem with that is that once it starts, it cannot be stopped. So a serious matter in evaluating a mine deposit is to know what the acid-producing potential is of the mine and what the neutralizing potential is of the rock that's in the vicinity of the mine that can be used to stabilize that possible generation of the acid mine drainage. In the case of Bald Mountain, that ratio of neutralizing potential to acid-producing potential is exceedingly low. It's a very high-risk mine, and that is why even after many tens of millions of dollars of investment in that mine deposit, two major international mining companies have walked away from their investment. The significance of that is twofold. One is if the mining industry walks away from it, you know there's a problem. The second is that one of the arguments in favor of doing mining in Maine is to create jobs. And the interesting thing here is that nobody noticed that tens of millions of dollars were spent on that mine deposit. And the reason is the jobs are not created where the mine deposit is. The jobs will not be created in Maine when Maine deposits are mined. So no one in Aroostook County even knew that tens of millions of dollars had been spent on the mine in their county.
Exploring that option.
Right. And it was unknown. In fact, that was information that was finally pried out of the Department of Environmental Protection's files by a very active citizen using Maine's Freedom of Access Act to force the department to release that material, and that's the only reason we now know of it. And the legislature did not know that when they passed LD 1853. They did not know it when the rules were being reviewed 2 years ago by the Department of Environmental Protection during those public hearings. We still didn't have that information at that time. Now we have that information. We can't get it in the public record because the department hasn't held the public hearings due to the Administrative Procedure Act violation, and the legislature is going to ram it through. I mean, the leadership of both parties is going to ram this through the legislature without any due deliberation on it to understand what they're doing.
As a legislator, how can you explain this championing by the Democratic and Republican leadership?
How can I explain their irrational behavior? Is that your question? I often caution people against a rational analysis of the inherently irrational. This is where I have to learn frustration coping skills, because for me, this is a major problem. I went into the legislature with a thought that I could bring some science, some scientific thinking to bear on matters of public policy and solve some public problems. And this is a good example. There's a lot of technical information, very technical information, that concerns the chemistry, the geochemistry, the biological effects, the ways in which the heavy metal toxins are distributed in the waterways and so forth. Very technical. And yet we're not really even able to get at the policy questions involving those technical details, because from a process point of view, something's just being rammed through. And the thing that's being rammed through, as I say, is the industry-written rules.
And are we seeing a lot of that speed coming from the co-chairs of the Natural Resources Committee, Savio and Welsh, or where do we see that pressure coming from? Can you see Irving in there lobbying? How do you understand it as an insider?
Well, JD Irving's hired the Pierce Atwood legal firm, and I've talked with their lawyers that are working on this issue. But where I see it directly is that the scheduling of the hearing, you mentioned there's a hearing in a couple weeks. I haven't actually seen the public notice of that hearing yet, but it's due out today, so perhaps it's been posted. That hearing schedule is up to the chairs of the committee. The chairs of the committee is a Republican senator, Tom Saviello, and a Democratic representative, and that's Joan Welsh. And in my conversations with Representative Welsh, she points out that she's, quote, under a lot of pressure, unquote, to have the hearings as quickly as possible. And I have tried to encourage her to have the hearings delayed some so that we can examine other ideas like the one that I will be bringing forth when the bill that I've written is released from the revisor's office.
You're listening to RadioActive on WERU. We're talking with Representative Ralph Chapman about the reemergence of a bill containing DEP changes to mining regulations in Maine. And can we quickly touch upon, too, you've also had a conversation with the Attorney General's office about the Maine Administrative Procedure Act, and you had sort of an interesting story of how you ended up blocking it at some levels, but can you just talk a little bit about how that issue unfolded and your understanding around that?
So this is where it gets down into procedural detail, but the rules that were rejected by the legislature last year that came back to us this session, the way that happens is they come to the House floor where the House accepts them, not accepting the rules, but accepts the filing of those rules, and then refers it to a committee. And that's generally done and was done under the hammer, meaning the Speaker of the House announces it and says, without objection, we accept the rules. He hits the gavel. Then he says, will be referred to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources without objection, hits the gavel, and that's done. In other words, those are unanimous votes because we don't object. I was ready to object, but I did not at that time because although I thought something might be a little screwy with it, I did not actually know that there was a violation of the Maine Administrative Procedures Act. Had I known that at the time, I could have stood up and asked that the matter be indefinitely postponed, which would have killed it, or at the very least tabled or something. In other words, I would have had, I had an opportunity to do something then. I did nothing because I didn't have the information that I needed.
It's interesting. No other legislators knew or cared to stand up on the issue either.
Well, those who know these procedures very well are on the side that are trying to push it through and use these procedural details to get it through. So what happens is after it goes to the House, then it goes to the Senate. Now, in the meantime, I did learn that there was a problem with the Administrative Procedures Act, and I did talk to the attorney in the Attorney General's office that was working on this issue, and I did get a verbal clarification of what the problem was with the Administrative Procedures Act, and I did understand that the Attorney General's office told me they would not sign off on these rules unless the legislature explicitly acknowledged that this procedural matter had been undertaken. In essence, you see, when the legislature violates the law, and we say it's okay since we make the laws, that sort of makes it okay.
So by acknowledging that they're circumventing law or hopscotching over law,
right,
then they can actually circumvent the law.
And a way to do that is to have a bill that says we will take these rules in, notwithstanding, and then the citation for the part of the law that says that the rules are not legally before us because they haven't had the opportunity for the public hearing that the rules require. That legislation was filed also, and I was ready to pull the plug on that one when its sponsor, knowing that I was about to pull the plug, tabled it instead and has since withdrawn it. And I was able to get a senator, Senator Chris Johnson. I alerted him to the fact that these rules were coming before the Senate for referral to the committee, and he was able to block it there. He got the leadership to table it. I thought they were tabling it until they could get a written opinion from the Attorney General's office. 2 days later, they took it off the table and pushed it through. I don't believe they had any further conversation with the Attorney General. In other words, the leadership yielded to Senator Johnson for 2 days, but that's insignificant in terms of allowing for a broader discussion about what's happening here.
So in the end, the Attorney General will still have to sign off on this bill, we're thinking?
Well, they sign off on the rules. The rules, presuming the rules are accepted by the legislature, which in both the House and Senate.
And again, we're talking about the change to the mining rules or the
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, there's two different sets of rules, I guess, we're talking about, but it's complicated.
The mining rules that the Department of Environmental Protection submitted that were rejected in the last legislative session that have been resubmitted to us this session, the industry-written rules, those cannot go into effect until the Attorney General's office signs an acknowledgement that they were done in an appropriate fashion, a procedurally appropriate fashion.
And so where we are now then is the public hearing before the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, again, we said on February 25th, now with an LD number 146, a public hearing, but not the public hearing we're saying that should have happened under the DEP. Feel free to respond to anything on that, but also just given the time, I also want to give time to talk about specifically about what the public can do at this point if they're interested in giving their input on this issue, or concerns about how these procedures have been essentially circumvented, and any other opposition you're seeing from people in the legislature or other interested parties. Give a sense of, the public keeps on getting hopscotched over here, right, where you see them in this right now.
So as often as I can, I want to remind the public that the real power of government rests with the citizens. The fact that the citizens don't use their power as often or as forcefully as they could is why we're in a mess. Oftentimes in government, my own personal feeling is more citizen involvement will help straighten things out. On this issue, the citizen involvement could be to communicate with your elected leaders in Augusta, communicate with the Speaker of the House, communicate with the chairs of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and let them know that they have circumvented the public's right to public hearing. Let them know that they are pushing these rules through as quickly as possible in order to avoid public notice. Let them know that you're outraged that your government would be behaving in a way that's furthering the interests of a corporate entity rather than furthering your interests as a citizen.
And just to widen out the discussion about these mining regulations, if put into effect, are not only affecting the Bald Mountain potential site that JD Irving would like to develop, but it would affect, obviously, all of Maine. There are other sites that could be of mining interest throughout the state. Do you want to touch on that quickly?
Surely. Although the Bald Mountain site itself is the most studied unmined deposit of its type in the entire continent.
And what kind of mining? What kind of metals? These
are volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits which contain zinc and copper and a variety of other things, iron, lead, chromium, arsenic, a variety, different concentrations and different percentages of those. Silver, gold are also involved. Kind of a whole menu of potential metals. Which ones are extracted depends on what the concentrations are at any given site and what the market values are for the different metals. Where
else in the state could potentially be affected?
I believe about 10 counties in the state have known mineral deposits of this sort. There are half a dozen well-known sites around the state. To get an idea of what mining would mean to us, we can look next door to New Brunswick, which has some of the larger deposits of this type. The city of Bathurst in New Brunswick has been a mining area. I was just noting that their population has been going down steadily for the last 40 years. They have over 20% unemployment rate. It's on a beautiful shoreline of Bay Chaleur. One would think they would have a good tourist industry, and yet if you look up their tourist bureau, you find out it's very small. They have a tourist site that explains the mining industry to tourists, and they put that site 10 miles north of town on the edge of the ocean, and the mines are 10 miles southwest of the town where the environmental disasters are. So you have a situation in which if you want to see what mining does in terms of the economy of a region, we can look at mining just next door in New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm. Again, implying that what jobs that were created disappeared.
Yes, mining is really a job and economy destroyer. It's not a job creator. Clearly, we will very, very clearly lose more jobs in tourism than we would gain if we gained any in mining. Everybody thinks of mining jobs, at least you need truck drivers, but in fact, in modern day mining uses robotic trucks and doesn't hire truck drivers.
Are there other aspects that you want to mention at this time, including any discussion around the public hearing that's coming up, and what is within the purview of the public to even comment on?
Well, it is very likely that at the hearing, the chairs of the committee are likely to limit the testimony to things that are very, very specific. They don't want a wide-ranging discussion. They don't want to hear very many opinions. I hope to be there. I hope that I will be given an opportunity to speak. I don't expect that I will be afforded any greater time or latitude in topic area than anyone else. They very clearly do not want to hear my voice, and I will do my best to have it heard. And I encourage citizens to do the same. Our government cannot work well unless our voices are heard, and that's something that I hope we're able to do.
Representative Ralph Chapman, we thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll surely be following this issue.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Tonight, the Natural Resources Council of Maine will hold an informational session on the mining legislation at 6 p.m. at the Bangor Co. space at 48 Columbia Street. Co-chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, Representative Joan Welsh, did try to respond to an interview request, but was unable to schedule for today. We hope to hear from her next week. We'll also be covering in greater detail the new EPA ruling that state water quality regulations are insufficient in tribal waters. This Saturday, February 14th, is the annual Changing Maine gathering in Augusta. Sass Linekin is the program director of Resources for Organizing and Social Change, which is organizing this event. Tell us quickly about what it is, where it'll be, and what topics or issues are going to be explored.
Sure. So this is going to be the 21st annual Changing Maine gathering, and it's sort of a yearly meeting of the minds for grassroots activists that offers an ability for them to both grow their skill sets and make connections with other people who are working on similar or supporting issues. And there's a different theme every year, and this year's theme is called We Do Have the Power, Local Organizing Against Corporate and Industrial Projects. So it's, sort of the idea that unyielding growth by large corporations and industry is not only unsustainable and unhealthy for our planet, but that it also weakens community ties and it really stifles the voices of the people who are impacted most deeply by this kind of encroachment. Local organizing, it's a grassroots, the kind that takes on the form of direct action and asserting the right to self-governance, can really generate a loud voice and help to create change by building kind of an alternative network to that corporate structure that takes the craftsmanship out of local self-reliance and puts a price on relationships as if the value of community is really something that can be sold in the first place, which obviously, as many of us know, is not the case. So the day's events are really going to unfold with an emphasis on the power of story. And so we have a number of really powerful local organizers who have worked on different campaigns like local food ordinances. We're going to have somebody who's going to be there talking about the oil train campaign, which has worked really hard to try to stop fracked oil from coming across the state by train. And then we're going to have somebody who will be speaking on the South Portland ordinance that kept the tar sands out of Maine. And then we'll have somebody who is going to come and speak about the Penobscot Nation's right to retain their rights to their ancestral waterways, since there's currently this absurd assertion being made that their reservation does not include the waters that surround their islands. And then we also have somebody who will be talking about some of the issues that are going on in Searsport and what went on with the LPG tank, and somebody else who will be talking about toxics. And we have some students coming from UMO who are going to be talking about divestment, and then also some water rights issues dealing with stuff in Freiburg.
So give some of the details of where and when.
Sure. So it's 9 to 4 in Augusta at the University of Maine campus, and it's going to be at the Randall Center. And so check-in starts around 9 o'clock, but we're looking for the day itself to start sharp at 9:30 so that we can get people out on time so that nobody's traveling in bad weather.
Great. And anything else you want to add, and any contact information for more information?
If anybody has any questions or concerns, they can contact me at my email address, which is sass, that's SASS, .rosk, ROSC, @gmail.com, or they can give me a call at It's 607-2571.
Anything you want to add to who you expect to be there or who you're hoping to be there?
We're looking for people who really have no experience with organizing, that maybe, care about their community and would like to know how to sort of assert some local control in places where they feel they're having issues. And also are looking for people who maybe do have some experience in this and are looking to network with other people. This is going to be a great place for people not only to learn, but to connect with one another.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Sassalinican, and we'll speak with you in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Meredith.
And you've been listening to RadioActive on WERU Community Radio. Please call in and show your support, 1-800-643-6273.